In 1943, MI6 and naval intelligence orchestrated what sounds like a Hollywood script, and yet it worked. Operation Mincemeat involved dressing a homeless corpse in a British officer's uniform, planting fake documents on him, suggesting the Allies would invade Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily, and letting the body wash ashore in Francoist Spain. Spanish officials passed the documents to the Nazis, and Hitler bought it. German troops were repositioned to the wrong locations. Sicily was taken with significantly fewer casualties. One of the most successful deception operations in modern history. This isn't a spy thriller. This isn't Casino Royale or Skyfall. This is the story of an institution that lives in the shadows, between fact and fiction, ethics and expediency, the real world and Hollywood. An organization that operated where diplomacy fell silent and official government washed its hands of consequences. You might ask, don't the Americans have the CIA? Yes, they do. But even the CIA took its early cues from British models. Many of the intelligence techniques and codes of conduct in U.S. operations were imports from London in the 1940s. MI6 isn't just a spy agency, it's the old school, with crisp accents, tea served during coups, and a well-timed no comment that's more intimidating than any confession. So, if you thought espionage was all tuxedos and martinis, here's the truth. James Bond is the billboard. MI6 is the building behind it, a gray, fortified office on Vauxhall Cross, where decisions are made by people you'll never see on TV. And those decisions might stop a coup, prevent a war, or quietly start one. Subscribe to our channel if you love deep, thoughtful stories, rich with facts, paradoxes, and a touch of irony. And don't forget to drop a comment below telling us where you're listening from and what time it is there. We love knowing which corners of the world you're tuning in from. At the turn of the 20th century, the British Empire ruled over a quarter of the world's population. But while its colonial power was vast, a new anxiety was brewing, not from the colonies, but from the continent. Newspapers whispered of German spies prowling London. Novels by authors like Conan Doyle and John Buchan painted shadowy figures plotting invasions and sabotage. A new virus had entered the bloodstream of the British imagination, the fear of the Kaiser's spy. So in 1909, under the discreet orders of a Home Office committee, a curious thing was born, an entity with the rather ironic name of the Secret Service. No one knew exactly what it did, and in classic British style, its founders didn't fully know either. The first chief was Colonel Mansfield Cumming, described as an extroverted captain capable of ciphering, spying, and quoting Shakespeare. He began the tradition of signing all documents with a green ink C, short for chief. To this day, all MI6 heads are referred to simply as C. In those early days, intelligence was less a profession and more an elite pastime. Recruits came through personal connections, drawn from upper-crust circles, especially Oxford and Cambridge. Loyalty to the crown, good manners, and eloquent English were key qualifications. Experience in espionage? If anything, that was considered suspicious. Amateurs were thought harder to detect. It was all delightfully chaotic. The service had no defined mandate, no set budget, and most officers made things up as they went along. In one famous incident, an agent claimed to have discovered German U-boat construction in Hamburg, but had simply photographed beer tanks. Another warned that the Kaiser was preparing to land forces on the southern coast, prompting panic at British ports. That, too, turned out to be fiction, and yet MI6 slowly evolved. During World War I, it built networks across Europe, the Middle East, even Persia. Radio interception, code-making, and agent legend building became standard tools. One operative, known as Agent Zed, sent coded telegrams from Berlin signed, "With love from your old friend." Some of these messages saved the lives of British soldiers. Even in its early years, MI6 had a hard truth to face. The threat wasn't just outside. In the 1920s, several agents were exposed as working for the Bolsheviks. One leaked London's telegraph infrastructure, another passed names of British informants in Russia. These were the first warning bells of a sickness that would explode later. Traitors from within, sleepers waiting to strike at the most critical moment. By the interwar period, MI6 was no longer just a gentleman's experiment. It was becoming a bureaucracy, filled with procedures, offices, and internal files. Branches opened in Cairo, Istanbul, Bombay. Its agents were no longer adventurers, but clerks with a chain of command. And therein lay the danger. Paperwork began to drown insight. So when the 1930s rolled in, and with them a man named Adolf Hitler, MI6 was still unprepared. British intelligence wasn't born from heroic ambition, but from paranoia. And that paranoia, fear of the unseen, became its driving force. At first, it was an amateur club of gentlemen with code names. But even then, it held a power that could tilt the fate of empires. The next great test would be World War II, where MI6 would step out of the shadows and into the epicenter of history. But was it ready? In early 1939, the mood inside British intelligence offices was tense. Hitler had already devoured Austria, carved up Czechoslovakia, and to MI6 operatives, he no longer seemed like a loud political clown. The question was no longer if war would come, but how to outsmart the machine behind the Third Reich, its propaganda, its generals, its spies. It was during the Second World War that MI6 truly evolved, from an amateur outfit into a full-scale operational force. Disinformation, logistics, psychology, technology, and, of course, the exploitation of human weakness became its weapons of choice. Imagine an office straight out of a science fiction novel. Bulletproof windows, underground tunnels, rooms that don't appear on any floor plan. But what if this office wasn't fictional at all? What if it was real and for decades officially didn't exist? Welcome to the world of Britain's secret intelligence service, MI6. Until 1994, its existence wasn't even acknowledged by Parliament. Government spokespeople would answer media inquiries with a kind but firm phrase, "We do not comment on matters of national security." Translation, it's real, but it's none of your business. Behind that silence lay operations that shaped the course of history. MI6 warned of Hitler's intentions before World War II erupted. MI6 was infiltrated by Soviet agents at the height of the Cold War. And it was MI6 that informed Western governments in 2003 that Iraq did not possess weapons of mass destruction, though no one seemed to listen. MI6 ran a network of double agents, people pretending to work for the Nazis while secretly feeding them lies. Some were ideologically ambiguous, others were flipped. Among them were Poles, French, Germans, even British citizens who had once sympathized with fascism. Agent Garbo, Juan Pujol Garcia, was a master of illusion. He convinced Berlin he had a network of 27 informants, all imaginary. His reports, completely fabricated, earned him a Nazi Iron Cross, while the British quietly awarded him the MBE. MI6 also mastered the technical theater of war. They faked entire communication networks in northern France, creating the illusion that a major Allied invasion would hit the Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. This deception was critical to the success of D-Day on June 6, 1944. German divisions were pinned away from the actual landing site. Fake information, in the right hands, won real battles. Though technically a post-war Cold War operation, Operation Gold deserves mention here as it was rooted in ideas first explored during Doppelböot by MI6 minds. In 1954, MI6 and the newly founded CIA decided, why catch Soviet spies when you can just listen to them? The plan: dig a 450-meter tunnel from the U.S. sector of Berlin beneath Soviet-controlled territory to tap into their military communication lines. They did just that. For over a year, Western intelligence listened to Soviet officers discussing troop movements, strategy, even casual gossip. But there was a twist. Soviet intelligence already knew about the tunnel, thanks to George Blake, a double agent inside MI6. Rather than exposing it, the KGB fed false data through the lines. It became one of the great ironies of Cold War espionage, a triumph that was secretly staged by the enemy. Not every operation was glorious. In 1941, Germans cracked parts of British codes due to sloppy operator habits. Some agents were captured or killed. One infamous figure, Cicero in Turkey, passed sensitive documents from the British Embassy to the Nazis for cash, not ideology. There were also cultural failures. Some senior MI6 officers refused to work with non-Brits, distrusting Poles, French, and others. Valuable intelligence was lost due to prejudice masquerading as patriotism. Throughout the war, MI6 closely cooperated with the American OSS, the CIA's precursor. They shared techniques in identity crafting, sabotage, psychological warfare. MI6 gave OSS its first taste of espionage protocol. The Americans brought money, manpower, and reach, particularly in the Pacific Theater. This alliance would birth the post-war Five Eyes network, linking British, American, Canadian, Australian, and New Zealand intelligence into a tightly coordinated bloc. By the end of Doppelböot II, MI6 was no longer a gentleman's club. It had become a ruthless, well-oiled machine, flexible, sharp, and hungry for more. Many of its leaders emerged from the war feeling nearly invincible, as though secrets could shape the world. But a new enemy awaited, not bearing a swastika, but a red star. And this enemy was deeper, subtler, and far more dangerous. In 1946, the world split, not just politically, but operationally. Where spies once faced uniformed enemies, now the war was invisible. Between the West and the USSR, there was no official battlefield, but there was a front of information, and it was on this front that MI6 would face its most glorious, humiliating, and complex chapter yet. At the highest levels of British intelligence worked Soviet intelligence. It all began in the 1930s, when a group of young, brilliant, often idealistic students at Cambridge University decided that true morality in the 20th century lay with communism. Among them were Kim Philby, Guy Burgess, Donald MacLean, Anthony Blunt, and likely John Cairncross. Their betrayal wasn't merely espionage, it was institutional sabotage. They infiltrated diplomacy, journalism, and MI6 itself. They passed tens of thousands of documents to Moscow, exposed Western agents, and, most fatally, helped dismantle Western intelligence networks inside the USSR, many of which were liquidated in Stalinist purges. In 1951, Burgess and MacLean vanished, later surfacing in the USSR. It shocked the British public. But the true earthquake came in 1963, when Philby, long considered MI6's golden boy, defected to Moscow. Philby's defection triggered a full-blown crisis. Intelligence networks were in tatters. The Americans suspended major intelligence cooperation for several years, fearing British security had been fundamentally compromised. Inside MI6, suspicion ran rampant. Trust, the currency of espionage, was gone. The era was nicknamed the Age of Mirrors because even spies no longer knew whom to trust. Lie detectors, internal audits, endless revetting all yielded few answers and deepened the paranoia. In the 1970s, MI6 began a slow transformation. Its new front lines, intelligence operations in the Arab world, especially after the 1973 oil crisis, expansion of electronic surveillance, code-breaking, and early computational analysis, the rise of algorithmic decryption, early signals intelligence, SIGINT. Yet the old school lingered. Tradition, elitism, and the gentleman's code often slowed progress. Espionage was changing. MI6 struggled to keep pace. 1979. Several MI6 informants were executed in Iran due to a data leak in London. The loss was both operational and moral. 1984. A high-level British defense official was found leaking data to a Soviet journalist who was, of course, a spy. Political shockwaves followed. 1985. A British agent working with anti-communist groups in Africa was captured and killed after France accidentally handed over his dossier via a diplomatic channel. By the 1990s, MI6 had changed. The USSR was gone, but new threats arose: global terrorism, arms smuggling, cyber warfare. In 1994, the British government officially acknowledged the existence of MI6 for the first time. The service emerged, partially, from the shadows. It got a website, a communications department, even a public-facing recruitment portal. It was no longer just for Oxbridge gentlemen in tailored suits. Analysts, linguists, coders were now just as essential. But the memory of Philby and his friends still haunts the service. The lessons of betrayal would shape its culture for decades to come. When most people hear MI6, they instantly imagine a stern man in a tuxedo, an Aston Martin with hidden machine guns, and a witty inventor named Q handing out exploding pens and wristwatch lasers. But how much of that is real, and how much is cinematic fantasy? For decades, MI6 officially distanced itself from the James Bond franchise. Still, when GoldenEye premiered in 1995, the service quietly welcomed the PR boost. After all, the myth of the suave British spy was good for national image, even if it wasn't quite the truth. There are no agents with weaponized bow ties. But the idea of a technical support unit developing tools for field operations, very real. One of the inspirations for Q was Charles Fraser Smith, a real-life engineer who worked during World War II for Britain's Special Operations Executive. He designed concealed radios, sabotage devices, and hidden communication tools, all real-world versions of Bond's gadgets. Ian Fleming, who had intelligence experience himself, reportedly drew on Fraser Smith's work when creating his fictional Q. Some real devices sound just as wild as fiction. There was a wallet that released a hidden blade when pressed, a lighter that doubled as a radio transmitter, shoes with built-in microphones that transmitted audio via infrared signals, and, most famously, the umbrella with a poisoned tip, used in the assassination of Bulgarian dissident Georgy Markov in London in 1978. That device delivered a tiny pellet of ricin, killing him within days. No movie script, just history. In more recent decades, the gear has evolved. Physical gadgets gave way to digital tools, flash drives with self-wiping firmware, fake Wi-Fi hotspots designed to extract phone data, apps disguised as calculators or games, but in fact transmitting photos and coordinates. Silent technologies that leave no fingerprints, yet alter lives. Leaks suggest MI6 has heavily invested in biotechnology, nanotech, and AI-powered analysis. Among its rumored projects, facial recognition software that works at extreme angles, or algorithms that detect changes in gait or voice tone to track individuals across countries. But with power comes ethical peril. If an intelligence agency uses deepfake technology to extort a foreign asset, is it security or abuse? If spyware implants fake data on a suspect's device, is that defense or entrapment? MI6 has maintained internal ethics committees since the 2000s. But in practice, espionage walks a line drawn in disappearing ink. Even when they follow protocol, agents often operate in legal gray zones, and the line between protection and violation is paper-thin. The modern equivalent of Q is not one mustachioed genius, but entire teams of data scientists, AI engineers, linguists, and coders. They build tools that analyze voice inflection in intercepted calls. They deploy machine learning to identify behavioral anomalies on CCTV. Some systems even predict intent based on keystroke patterns or walking speed. This isn't spy fiction anymore. It's hypermodern espionage, and it often outpaces imagination. In espionage, as in theater, success depends on keeping the audience guessing. But what happens when the performance unravels, the masks slip, and the curtain offers no protection? For MI6, the 21st century did not begin in triumph, but in a crisis of trust. This time, it wasn't defectors who betrayed the service. It was society itself, asking whether the institution still deserved its moral authority. In 2003, the UK joined the invasion of Iraq, citing intelligence reports claiming Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction. While some MI6 officers raised doubts internally, the intelligence was filtered, massaged, some say politically steered, in a more convenient direction. The consequences: a war without UN authorization, thousands of deaths, regional collapse, and a public trust deficit. Journalists and inquiry panels demanded answers. MI6 remained silent, but its credibility had suffered one of the deepest blows in its modern history. Meanwhile, another embarrassment was quietly unfolding. Operation Olive, a campaign to establish influence over militia commanders in post-Gaddafi Libya, ended in disaster. Unencrypted communications leaked the identities of several assets. One was killed, another captured. The Libyan government accused the UK of colonial interference disguised as counterterrorism. Then came 2018. A former Russian spy, Sergei Skripal, and his daughter were poisoned with the Soviet-developed nerve agent Novichok in Salisbury. MI6 helped trace the attack to GRU operatives, but no arrests followed. The question hung in the air. How had armed assassins traveled under MI6's radar? Who was watching them? Why was there no warning? Worse still, in 2023, a British journalist leaked a trove of files alleging MI6's covert funding of militant groups in West Africa to stabilize the region. Critics saw geopolitical strategy, others a neo-colonial gamble. Once again, MI6 responded with the time-honored no comment. But the public wasn't quiet. These episodes led to internal reforms, stronger encryption protocols, expanded parliamentary oversight, the creation of an ethics unit with power to veto operations. But skeptics called it a cosmetic fix. Rumors surfaced of continued psychological operations, crypto market manipulation, even activist surveillance, all in MI6's gray zone. And yet, no scandal was more costly, more shapeless, or more paranoia-inducing than Operation Wedlock. It began in the 1990s in an atmosphere of optimism and unease. The Cold War was over, the Soviet Union was gone. But something wasn't right. MI5 began noticing anomalies. Agent lines going dark in Eastern Europe, intelligence leaks with no source, analytical forecasts being subtly wrong. A whisper began to circulate. Someone on the inside was working against them. The theory was simple. MI6 had a mole, not a romantic ideologue like Kim Philby, but a cold pragmatist, trading secrets for money or leverage. By 1998, MI5 had launched a dedicated unit in partnership with the Ministry of Defense, tasked with hunting the alleged insider dubbed Target W. 3 suspects emerged, all high-ranking, all with clean records. One a Balkan expert, one a technical analyst, one head of the Iran division. All had access to sensitive data, and all showed up in behavioral patterns or file trails connected to intelligence losses. So began what would become the most expensive, unsolved mole hunt in British intelligence history. Over 20 years, Operation Wedlock would cost $48 million, involve 32 active investigators, and trigger more than 140 cross-briefings with allied agencies including the CIA, BND, and even Mossad. The tactics were subtle. Decoy files were leaked individually to each suspect to see which version might surface in intercepted Russian chatter. All 3 underwent triple rounds of polygraph testing, all passed. Barely. Their grocery purchases, GPS history, and heart rates during meetings were monitored. Home lines tapped. Still, no smoking gun. In 2006, the Balkanist suddenly retired and relocated to Canada. Officially, it was just retirement. MI5 suspected flight. He died of heart failure in 2010 in his flat. Books on Serbian intelligence and letters from former diplomats. No clear proof, no arrest. In 2015, a BND source heard chatter in Moscow referencing Operation W. Ladya. Coincidence? Or a code name for the very mole MI6 had hunted for 2 decades. Then in 2022, an informant in Tbilisi, active since 2007, went off-grid. He was found dead, tortured. 2 weeks earlier, he had sent a message. Be careful with W, they're close. Who was they? The Russians? The British? In 2023, internal MI6 documents leaked to the press. Reports of internal tension, budget blowouts, one director refusing to authorize a surveillance order against a colleague. The world saw what intelligence insiders already knew. MI6 was hunting shadows. The case read like a le Carré novel. Only worse, there was no catharsis. In 2025, the operation was closed. Officially, no conclusive evidence. Unofficially, we didn't catch a mole, but we can't rule one out. It was a defeat with no villain, a victory for paranoia. Wedlock changed MI6. The Internal Security Division was granted sweeping new powers. Biannual psychological screening became mandatory. Data access rules were rewritten from scratch. But the lasting damage was to trust. A culture of mirror suspicion took hold, where every officer feared that the spy might be their neighbor, their friend, their boss. Operation Wedlock didn't find a traitor, but it broke belief. And that, in the end, was the real price. In October 2025, something happened that just a decade earlier might have seemed unthinkable. For the first time in history, the head of the UK's Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, is a woman. Her name is Blay Metrawele. To some, she symbolizes progress. To others, she's a strategic PR move. But one thing is clear, MI6 is no longer a gentleman's club in Savile Row suits. Who is she? Metrawele brings over 25 years of experience in both MI6 and MI5. She speaks Arabic, studied mathematics and computer science at Oxford, and is known as a quiet, technical-minded modernizer, a far cry from the James Bond archetype. She previously led MI6 Tech Department, the very one tabloids once dubbed the real-life Q branch. Her appointment reflects several overlapping shifts. First, female leadership is no longer exotic, even in institutions as opaque and traditional as intelligence. Second, it's a sign of transformation. MI6 now needs systems managers more than field heroes. Third, it's a deliberate move to distance the agency from recent scandals, like Operation Wedlock, and usher in a new professional ethic. But even before her formal appointment, Metrawele was swept into controversy. A German outlet reported that her grandfather, Konstantin Dobrogurski, was a Nazi collaborator during Betrayals, allegedly linked to crimes in Eastern Europe. He had emigrated to Britain under an assumed identity. The UK government moved quickly. Officials stated Metrawele had never met or communicated with her grandfather and had only learned of him through declassified archives. Still, Russian and Chinese media seized the narrative. Britain's new spy chief is the descendant of a war criminal. The episode laid bare an old intelligence truth. No family skeleton stays in the closet when you live under the microscope of geopolitics. While Metrawele declined public comment, MI6 reportedly tightened biographical screening protocols across all ranks. Still, her main task isn't crisis management, it's modernization. According to a leaked briefing published by the Financial Times, her vision for MI6 rests on 4 pillars: algorithmic security, using AI to model threats in real time; hybrid ethics, balancing secrecy with democratic accountability; next-generation recruitment, focusing on talent from hacker collectives, Manchester tech hubs, not just Oxbridge dining clubs; counterintelligence without paranoia; smarter screening, less hysteria. In short, MI6 is shifting from missions by mavericks to systems that think. The only question is, will the world allow it? In an era where espionage is increasingly about code, deception, and counter-narratives, the appointment of a woman at the top seems not just progressive, but symbolic. Classic spycraft is dying. In its place comes bureaucratic cyber invisibility. A spy is someone you don't notice in a crowd. Sometimes he wears a cheap wool blazer, sometimes a comic book t-shirt. He doesn't look heroic. He looks forgettable. In the 21st century, MI6 is no longer the shadow smoking on a balcony in Istanbul. It's code, an algorithm, a ghost in a Wi-Fi signal. In an age where wars are waged not by generals but by interfaces, the question, is espionage moral, has never been more urgent, because MI6 was never just an agency. It was an instrument of imperial ambition, then a Cold War firewall, now a guardian in cyberspace. From gentleman tricksters to bug-fixing analysts, its evolution mirrors our own. One could argue this proves espionage is evil, but maybe espionage is simply a mirror of our times, always dishonest, always hidden, and always a little frightening. But without it, nations would be blind, like pilots without radar. More importantly, spycraft reveals who we are: paranoid, cautious, computational. We no longer seek heroes. We seek behavioral anomalies, not trench warriors. MI6 is no longer just about intelligence. It's a metaphor for a world too complex to survive without secrets. Thank you for walking this path with us. If you enjoyed this slow-burning deep dive into the shadowy world of Her Majesty's spies, be sure to subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. Which part of the story shocked you the most? We're already working on our next major deep dives into the mafia, the Inquisition, century-spanning scams, and dictators with Napoleon complexes. The best is yet to come. Until next time, and remember, sometimes the most important things happen in the shadows. Zapatati ChatGPT